Good evening and welcome to the Canby Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to say to Mr. Ewert in Television Land and to the rest of the audience, we miss you, but welcome to the new revised Canby Planning Commission. We have two new Planning Commission members with us tonight. We have Mr. Hensley and Mr. Savory. And are we going to be doing anything to start with that from the beginning?
I think it'd be real good if they just kind of introduce themselves to us. Make sure that everybody is familiar with our new people.
I'll start. John Savory, resident of Canby for 19 years. I own an office products company in Portland and in Bend, and a craft store in Tigard. So, got 2 kids and a wife. So, there you are.
Sean?
I'm Sean Hensley, and I have lived in Canby most of my life, off and on all of my life. But I work in Donald, so I'm local. I work in metal fab, and I have 4 kids, 2 grown and off on their own, and 2 little ones that probably half of you have ran into at some point or another. My wife's on council here in town, and that's me.
Okay. So I think the first item of business is to, if I've been temporarily appointed the chair, I guess that's already been done, but we need to have actual elections for chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission. So I think the first item there would be to have nominations. Are there any nominations for chair of the Canby Planning Commission?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a recommendation that we have Tyler Smith here to be our chair.
Second.
Is there any other nominations? Not hearing any other nominations. Nominations for chair will be closed. All those in favor of appointing well, I should probably hand the meeting over to the interim vice chair to conduct the actual election here. Sean, why don't you conduct the actual?
I would just pick it up from where you left off, and if for all those in favor of electing Tyler as the chairman of the Canby Planning Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Nay? I say the votes passes. Did you abstain?
No, I voted for myself.
Okay.
I didn't vote. I didn't actually. My mouth didn't move, but I did vote for myself.
6-0.
Okay.
Congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So the next item of our business would be the nominations for vice chair of Canby Planning Commission. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Chair, I nominate Sean Joyce as vice chair.
Sean Joyce.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations for vice chair? No other nominations. Nominations are closed. All those in favor of Sean Joyce being elected as the vice chair of the Canby Planning Commission signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous, I believe. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Okay. The next item of business, that closes the elections. The next item of business would be a public hearing continued from December 10th, 2012. City staff has compiled and is requesting approval of a number of text amendments for numerous proposed Canby Land Development and Planning Ordinance edits. We have a revised table of contents. Looks fantastic this time, going through them in a little bit more detail for each one. So, with that, Angie, Brian, who wants Angie? You gonna?
I think Angie's going to take over.
So good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, and welcome to our new Commissioners. So this is a continuance from some text amendments from last meeting, and just basically some code cleanup. Basically everything we do in planning is overall dictated by our zoning code, so it's important to make periodic changes as needed to it, and so that's what we're continuing to do here tonight. I think I'll just briefly go over all the changes, just very briefly, that we've done so far, and then go over page by page and detail the pink changes, which are the changes that have been made since last meeting. And the ones that were made for the first meeting are in yellow, and tonight is pink. So,
and
does
the-
that work for you?
And the pink was recommended pretty much by the planning.
Yeah, the pink was resulting from last meeting's discussions. So, and a couple of other things that staff found in between then and now. And there's always going to be things that we find, so.
So yellow is the old revisions that we saw last
Yeah.
time. Pink are the new ones that you've
Yeah.
made since.
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
So, so we initiated these changes in the code based on feedback from citizens and from staff using the code on a daily basis, and feedback from the Planning Commission. Overall, the changes include clarifying the duties of the planning director, clarifying code interpretations, making grammatical errors and correcting confusing language, modifying the multifamily design standards, modifying some standards in the downtown overlay zone, clarifying automobile sign and temporary sign standards, clarifying lighting standards, clarifying application and review procedures, clarifying the role of the site and design review board, clarifying the design review menu so that it's more legible and easier to comply with, and more streamlined, clarifying landscaping requirements, altering the membership requirement of the Historic Review Board so fewer members are required, and omitting outdated solar access and balance standards due to several problems of these standards discovered over the years. They're obsolete, and technology has rendered them obsolete and impractical, and they are a nightmare to administer, and they encourage inefficient use of land, cumbersome, counterproductive, so those are just being proposed to be omitted. So we discussed that last time. If you want more details of why we're more discussion, I'll be sure to go into that if that's what the Planning Commission would like to go into some more. Kind of a discussion, feedback is how we were doing it, so discussion as we're going through this is encouraged. So that's some of the overall changes, and more specifically the changes that have been made since last meeting and tonight. We'll go over those, and those are the changes in pink. So if you want to turn to, it's a few pages in your packet, chapter 1605. And just feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions or comments or anything. So this page here, interpretation 1605.
New guy on the block.
Yes.
So I get this 72-page behemoth. And so what was the, are we going to discuss this tonight? I mean, I simply don't know. So we got this, we got this. I thought,
I'm not
so this is the one that I reviewed.
I think it's the same.
It's the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they just put it in your binder for you as well.
Oh, okay.
Same thing.
Same thing.
So
Yeah.
you can save the paper next time.
So where we're at with this, if anybody doesn't know the full process, we would review these, edit it, and do hopefully most of the substantive heavy lifting. Staff has done most of that, obviously, but then we would consider it more thoroughly, maybe, than City Council would. Then they would make the final passage of the ordinance to change this if they approve of our changes. Obviously, they could go back to the drawing board, but their trust in us is that hopefully we've worked out the kinks and maybe done most of the refinement. So that's kind of the process we're at. We could vote today if we choose to forward these on to the City Council as is or with changes, anything we discuss and would vote on today. That's kind of what we could do today. Angie, to you, on this first one, so we're at 1605-020. we talked about sort of maybe defining complex interpretations,
Right.
or when you guys would actually issue a written decision.
So is everybody, I guess, on that page now? And so we're just going to be going over the pink stuff, which is, so. Yeah, so the first change is the Planning Commission last meeting wanted some more details of what a complex interpretation is. Kind of struggled with that. I tried to elaborate that on a little bit, but I think a complex, it's somewhat arbitrary, and I think that's the intention of that wording, is kind of getting the director some discretion, but hopefully the option to deem something complex or not complex, and not, if you want to deem it more complex, then you've got to go through a more cumbersome process and send notice out to surrounding property owners, and so I guess I struggled with it a little bit, and it is still a little bit arbitrary. You know, I think, you know, for an example of something that's has specific approval criteria would be like, is over 35 feet high, is concrete, is it's something that has those specific standards. But
Let me ask you guys this from your, you know, because you guys have to deal with this all the time, but as you know, that the question of whether something is a land use decision or not comes down, and whether it's appealable to LUBA oftentimes says whether it's an objective or a subjective. If there's discretion, then it's land use decision for sure. It's not, can't be a ministerial decision. So what would that, from your guys' perspective, change if we changed specific with objective, so that if the decision was based on something that's objective, like you said, a measurement, a distance, I don't know what other things are subjective, if it's within a certain zone, if it's, you know, things that are not, there's no subjectivity, no discretion on it, that would be when it would be a more complex. If we're trying to define more complex,
right,
would that make sense from your perspectives and having to deal with the day-to-day?
does not have objective approval criteria.
Right. If it's subjective, if you're having to evaluate, weigh evidence, think about that, then
And
that
that
would
should
be
be
more
a more complex.
more
process.
documented
Yeah.
than not, or
Yeah, that works for me. I like that.
any other thoughts?
It's almost like you've done this before.
Objective is the word we were looking for.
Okay. So that would be in B and C. Okay. Andrew, is there any other discussion about this one, or do we want to? One of the reasons we had discussed this for the two new commission members is that sometimes it's good to have decisions that are interpretive in nature on file, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, and to document it. It avoids the possibility of there ever being unfair treatment between different applicants. It just helps overall. And this sort of cleaned up our old language on how and when that was supposed to take place.
Kind of helps deal with when people come to the counter, hey, I want to put I keep thinking of the radio tower one that came up. I want to put a radio tower up. FCC makes us have a 32-foot high tower, and our code says 31 and a half. Well, then it doesn't. It's more to help when people come to the counter get things moving and not hold up, you know, in some cumbersome process.
And the objective criteria there would be the 32 feet because
yeah, that's
FCC
probably not a good example.
overrides.
Something I want to put in
Can you think
Well, if
of
the
a good
tower was
example?
31 feet of metal and 1 foot of base, is that a
Right.
31-foot
There you
tower or
go.
is it a 32-foot tower?
Something
There
like
you
that,
go.
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the kind of stuff we
And then
run
they interpret
across.
that, and that becomes on record.
Yeah.
Or if we have something in the code that conflicts with another part of the code, we get that all the time, and that's what we're trying to correct here tonight. But, you know, which part of the code do you use? Do you use that one or that one? Well, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of stuff that this type of language will help, that everyday type of stuff.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one if there's not any more discussed on that one.
Page 7. This is per the Planning Commission discussion from last meeting. The planning director or the planning commission could be involved with this instance of, it's basically saying all vehicle movement areas should be paved, but the planning director or the planning commission could approve the use of an engineered aggregate system when the following are met. So we're kind of making it said before the planning commission only, but sometimes we don't want to have to go to the planning commission for every little thing. So that's director or planning commission statement there. Set. Good?
Like what we planned on.
Next page. This is just a clarification from a comment made at last meeting to specify that when someone puts some permeable surface materials on private property, that's the responsibility of the private property owner and not the city. I think that's kind of implied in our public works standards nowadays, and it's just stating something more clearly that already exists.
Was there an issue in this in the first place?
There's, I think, continuing dialogue between like privately owned streets. I don't know if they have any permeable surfacing, but they're streets that are privately owned and not publicly owned.
Yeah.
So
Was the city
they'll
ever
call
res-
us.
Was the city ever responsible for it in the first place?
No, but then sometimes they'll call and say, hey, why aren't you repairing our street? Well, it's
Yeah.
not our street.
Part of the reason it's come up is because the use of permeable paving is a new thing that we've just been doing the past few years. And so it's becoming more of a potential issue. So this is trying to address that fact that as we encourage more and more people to use permeable surfacing, then you do have to maintain it or it will plug up and won't serve its function for soaking runoff into the ground. So that's what it's based upon.
So if you go to page 10 and 11 in the packet, basically that sentence was just inserted anywhere where we're talking about the city encouraging permeable surfacing. I just put that statement in various parts of the code where it has that. That's what that is.
One thing that, I don't know how the rest of the commission feels about this. I know last month we talked a little bit about the concept of, it was on one of these, where we were trying to sort of advise people or educate them in a sense with the language. If somebody can help me on which topic it was on, but we were putting in some extra information that was sort of like a recommendation on what we would want somebody to do. When we're thinking about that going forward, at least it's my opinion that we should be careful with that. We don't want to make because if that's done year after year after year, the total cumulative substance of our code can get very long and hard to read and have too much stuff in it that's not necessarily the requirements.
Okay.
And so I think we should probably at least keep an eye on the right balance and not have a practice that goes for 10 years and then it becomes our code is super complex and over.
What was that?
I
I remember us talking about it, but I'm with you. I can't remember which part it was though.
Last stuff here.
Okay.
I think that's what you're talking about.
Was it on the lighting? Because maybe it had to do with the lighting. We were recommending people do something, and
All the,
we didn't want to make it a requirement.
Maybe,
When we get there, we'll figure it out.
But that struck me between
I
last
think it was
month.
about
No, we had-
the screening of
we omitted all
dumpsters,
this.
maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
About
yep, we got it.
screening
Angie's
of
got it. Yeah, we were
plants.
saying we would like people to, but we didn't want to require them to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a screening of dumpsters.
Was it?
I think
I thought it
so.
was like the entrance to like the back alley entryway or something like that.
We had that one too.
We can keep going on that.
All right, we'll probably get to them.
Yeah.
That was just a sort of something that came
It
about.
should be in here.
I thought about that when we repeated the same thing, the maintenance of alternative servicing multiple times. That's what struck
Yeah.
it. Struck a chord with what we.
Look at this one right here. Access management plan, an applicant requesting an access exception may be required to submit. an
That wasn't the one I was
access plan.
thinking of, but it's called. Okay, well, we can.
Okay. Well, if I see it here in a minute, should be in our package. Okay, so page 13, that was just a correction noted from last meeting, the 60 and the 10, that's reflecting the changes that are being made in this multifamily design review menu. So that's just being consistent with that. Page 16. That was per some planning commission discussion, if we're gonna require treatment of entries that serve as principal entries. If entrances are gonna be treated with awnings, lighting, signage, etc., they should be customer entries and not necessarily like an emergency exit or something, so that's what that is.
That's the one I remember.
Yeah.
That is kind of suggestive, and that was something, that was a concern brought up by our economic development director and Main Street businesses. And I mean, I guess there are some existing businesses that have auxiliary customer entrances that aren't really treated, but, those are kind of grandfathered in. This would be something for a brand-new building that would be a requirement, so. That's kind of why it's suggestive kind of language. Or not, it's,
It's
Yeah, it's not really
optional.
No.
It's
Yeah.
optional to provide another customer.
Right.
But if you do, then
Yeah.
it needs to
It
have
needs
these
to look
special
like-
treatments.
and we're not saying it needs a awning, lighting, we're not specifying which of those, but it needs to have some sort of indication that it's a
An
customer and entrance.
Right.
So. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going unless
Go
anybody
ahead.
interrupts me. Page 18. This was resulting of some discussion and citizen feedback of putting some more language in about taking down abandoned signs for a business that goes out, for someone that goes out of business. I think the reoccurring example was C&J's.
second half.
Yeah, that went out of business and left their sign and didn't take it down. So this specifies that once your sign's abandoned, when it's no longer advertising a business, lesser property space, etc., then it needs to come down. And then that right there just defines what an abandoned sign is. And then 2 pages further, it says that after it's been abandoned for 30 days, it needs to come down. And I put the sign copy area, that's on page 19. It's just the thing advertising a business. It's not including the brackets, the pole, the structural part of the sign. That's there's, I guess, some communities out there that, for example, if a place went out of business, the whole thing, you know, some communities in their sign codes say the whole structure itself needs to come down, and which could be expensive, and then, you know, another business might be coming in, you know, in the foreseeable future. So that's why I said basically just the sign copy area needs to come down, but, you know, that's a discussion item.
Is this
too.
one brand new? We didn't talk about this last month, did we?
This is
It's
new.
brand new.
Okay.
Now, on
It's-
signs, now like a barber sign, you know, that's, you couldn't just paint it up and everybody would still recognize it as a barber sign. So there are certain signs that have a certain look that everybody
Yeah.
recognizes. Now, on a sign like that, would that sign have to come down then?
Basically, what we're saying is just the name of the business, pretty much.
I have some concerns about this one. It seems to me that this might be catching too many fish with our net, because if, particularly B there, this would seem to me, if you read it, would ban or classify any sign as an abandoned sign if it was advertising for some business that wasn't located on that premises. If you've got a real estate sign,
Well, I think
it's advertising for the realtor,
I think that wouldn't be abandoned, though.
no
If-
longer directs or extorts any person, advertises a business, less or property for sale or lease,
If
okay.
it's,
Or activity conducted on the premises.
maybe that, you know, reads differently. I tried to, yeah, be specific. If it's advertising, it's for lease, and it's not abandoned, it's,
Yeah, it's
a functional-
doing what that property says.
What if somebody puts up a sign on their property for some other business?
well, I guess it's advertising and a business, and it's not abandoned, even though it's,
Well, those are very, I'm trying to think if they're basically prohibited.
Already?
Yeah.
That's what prohibits off-premises
Yes,
advertising?
we don't use that terminology anymore.
Because
But
it's
it basi-
unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's right. So, but it basically is prohibited by the code because it says the only signage that's allowed must be related to, I'm trying to think where that's at, must be related to the business that's on operation on the site. Now, there is some temporary signs that dealing with garage sales and realtor signs that can be supposedly, I guess, off-premise because we even allow them in the right-of-way on Saturday and Sunday. But otherwise, since we've been enforcing this sign, can't think where it is right now, you can't have a sign on your property that's advertising one down at the end of the highway somewhere else, if that's what it's advertising.
Well, at that, when Bricks and Minifigs moved across the highway, they had a sign in their front window that was stating that they'd moved. That would be the same thing. Their advertising business is no longer there.
Yeah, Canby Sign and Graphics still
Yeah.
has a sign on their old building that says Canby Graphics, so that would be in violation then.
Yeah, technically, it would be.
I don't
I
really
hadn't really, I don't think anybody's really had trouble with directing people when somebody's moved for some period of time
and I think
that's reasonable, and then
you could interpret that that's not an abandoned sign. It's directing, it's still serving a purpose.
That would be covered under the 30 days. Is that
Yeah,
what
I
you're saying?
suppose would it be covered under the 30-day? Then they would have to remove it after 30 days.
it could. But
Yeah, it could go either
thinking of
way.
these. If the sign's well,
I would say that
We do
the sign is
permit-
still advertising a business, so therefore it's not abandoned.
yeah, the thing is though,
But it's-
somewhere in the code it says you can't have off-premise
Off-premise
signs. It just doesn't use the terminology. Because the code enforcement officer's out picking up signs that people just place on other people's property all the time. Because it has nothing to do with the business that's on that property. And that gets tricky too, because supposedly you're not supposed to discriminate signs based upon what they say or their content. And the only way you can often do that is to read it to know it's the temporary signs that cause the problems.
I understand the intent, but I think the wording needs to allow for something like bricks and minifigs, moving locations. It needs to allow for, because the way, I mean, if I'm reading this, it says as soon as they moved, they are no longer able to put a sign in there because it's no longer conducted on the premises where the sign is located or displayed. So I agree with the need and I agree with the intent personally, but I think that we need to probably
You could remove conducted on the premises where a sign is displayed.
or put it. I mean, I would even. Yeah, I mean, you could put it or a time limit. Or I'm just trying to. I don't. I'm trying to blank on a solution.
Maybe we could
don't get
just
me wrong.
allow an
I'm just
exception
trying to think.
for the one or two things you've just named here. I mean, keep that, but except for allow an exception when it's a sign is associated with a business that's moved. So that what you need to visualize, though, is the worst-case scenario is they have a big pole sign. They've closed. It's 30 days later. It's a vacant, abandoned building, and you've still got this big sign up there. So what if they decide to change that sign up
moved
there,
somewhere else.
or say, now their name of their business, we have moved, we're now at this address, and it's up there on that big pole sign. Is that what you want to allow?
Well,
I can't
don't
think
I
of
would
it.
almost feel comfortable with the verbiage being in here with the exceptions to this can be. I would actually feel comfortable with that being at the discretion of the planning director. Exceptions to this rule, because then that would allow somebody comes in and says, hey, Bricks and Minifigs has a sign up there that they've moved. That's not in compliance with the code, and you'd be like, well, actually, I'm giving them an exception.
And I think that would be covered under the changes to the interpretation section that we just made. That would be like an instance where the planning director would be allowed some discretion to say, well, hey, that doesn't make sense. They should be allowed to put a sign in the window that they've moved for
Right.
a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, this has been around for at least 3.5 years. Particularly, I think it came up because of the economy when it was at its lowest point a couple of years ago. We had several abandoned buildings in town, and their signs were no longer applicable, and many of the counselors had heard from citizens that said, why can't we get those signs taken down? And even if we have it in here, it's still going to be an administrative code enforcement nightmare. But this at least gives us the authority to try to ask them to take their sign down when they're gone.
What if we changed B to something to make it just current? So if we said something like a sign which no longer correctly directs or exhorts any person advertises a business, lessor, or property space for sale, lease, owner, products, or activity to a current person, business, lessor, property, space for lease, owner, products, or activity. So make it so that it's got to be current. So if the business is still current, Canby Signage and Graphics or Bricks and Minifigs, it's still current business, then it's fine. You can stay there. But if the company went out of business and there is no Canby Signs and Graphics anymore, then a sign for Canby Graphics would be considered abandoned.
But I can see what Brian was saying with regards to like worst case scenario is Hoy-Tin, when they went out of business, they've got the biggest sign in town. They could have thrown up but maybe they moved down to the other end of town. They could throw a sign up that says, hey, we're down at the other end of town, and they could leave it up there indefinitely.
Well, I think this here where it says 30 days would be what you could come back and say, you've had that
Oh, you
sign
could
up there
put-
for 30 days, so now it's time to take it down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can even put like a distance. I mean, if, say that happened, but they moved to Medford, they're still technically kind of sound in our, you can put to locate like how far you can move, or if you keep it local still.
Yeah.
Or how about the Shell station that is now out of business, as I read?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
It seems close.
And that's kind of, that sign doesn't even have a sign well, I guess they could take the shell,
It's kind of a logo. Isn't it?
Yeah.
but there's still gonna be the pole and the brackets there, and I think that's another, that would make this completely controversial if we would make people take poles and the brackets and
Right.
all that down, but I don't even know if that sign has a sign copy face that they could take down.
The other piece of this,
I
with
guess
the,
you can't
Yeah.
anticipate everything.
with the first part, there's a little bit of uncertainty there. How much damage? I mean, how much damage is this?
That's what the code says now.
Yeah, I know.
So-
I know. I realize that, but I'm just thinking, okay, well, there's lots of signs that are damaged. There's lots of signs that
Yeah.
are ugly.
I don't
know. Even that's not great language either.
yeah.
Yeah, again, I mean, these are code enforcement issues primarily, and it depends on the culture within the community and how tolerant it is. And if you get enough complaints, then our code enforcement officer goes out and we interpret the code literally. If we get enough complaints and we try to get people to remove things, obviously depends on what part of town it's in and the size of the supposed objection, and all of those kind of things go into how you actually do code enforcement. But you want to have some ability in the code to respond if it really is a problem. When this issue came up, I was very hesitant to put something in here because it can be. Signs are the most controversial aspect of any development code. It's the most litigated aspect of any development code. And if you're dealing with somebody like Shell, especially if it's not some independent franchiser, then, and you tell them because they've decided to move somewhere else and they've abandoned that property, it could be very difficult to get them to take that Shell symbol down until someone buys it. And then they're going to automatically take it down. And so the issue is, how long is it going to take before that vacant building gets reoccupied? And that's what the council's concern is that we've had buildings vacant. This building's been vacant for 2 years and the same sign's still up there. It was as simple as that. How do we
Yeah.
get them to take it down?
But then to do that, I think the question is, how do you do that fairly and equitably, to not cause a lot of cost and expense to businesses? For instance, I've got a perfect example. My firm is upstairs in the Graham Stationery Building. Everybody knows where the Graham Building is. The sign still says Graham Stationery right on the front wall. They've been gone for 2 years. So they would have had to take that down. When we tell anybody in the building says the Graham Stationery Building knows where that's at, but
Yeah.
apparently they're in violation of this. And I don't know. It just seems to me that you could be hurting some businesses that, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe that it opens up a fairly big can of worms if we do it to the T. Because we have a lot of instances, and we've only had 1 or 2 actual complaints.
So if you just said there's only 1 or 2 complaints, so were you directed to put this in by somebody then?
I would say it was strongly suggested by several councilmen. That's why it's shown up here, because and they're representing our citizens, and they're saying that citizens have commented to them that they think this is an issue. So we're trying to figure out how to do that so we can have a little more authority.
So a business that's gone bankrupt and is exiting a office building, what would be the city's recourse to go after them, to force them to take it on a sign?
Exactly.
I mean, it's unsightly, don't get me wrong. I
No,
understand.
That's right, because so often
Discontent with it, but
they went out of business because they didn't have
Fine.
any money to
If I'm-
continue, and now
if I'm
you're going
100 grand in the
to
hole,
ask
I'm not
them to
gonna worry too
pay
much about a
for,
sign.
and that's why I said it's an administrative nightmare to actually get anywhere with this, no matter what we end up putting in here. And so that's the way I've been thinking of it, is that, you know, I'm not sure it's going to do us any good. It's going to mean a lot of spinning wheels for the staff, and in the end, we may get nowhere because we'll be dealing with businesses that are out of business. They're either out of state now, or they don't have any money, and this is the last thing they're thinking of until they get their building sold. And I'm thinking of examples around the Clackamas Mall. There's a huge, what's the restaurant right at the beginning entrance of the mall? It's been vacant for several months now. It's still advertising whatever fancy restaurant that was. Can't remember what it is now.
I don't want
It's
to
a-
live in there.
It's the,
Macaroni Grill?
yeah,
It closed?
yeah.
Yeah.
See, you didn't go often enough.
And so you watch there and see if that sign ever disappears, or it will disappear when it gets reoccupied by something else. And so we're trying to do something that I'm not sure too many other places have been successful.
Can you make it where it just says hanging signs?
I mean, I think if a sign is easy to remove,
If it's
and if we ask them and say, hey, our code says you need to remove your sign, even if our code didn't say you need to remove your sign, and we can get a hold of somebody, then they'll remove their sign. But
Some of them
in some
may
instances,
be easy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's worth it for that, to have that ability.
I think the sign that you have in question was down there, was the old Wygant's building. And at that point, I think people just wanted it down. They didn't care who it was that was going to take it down.
Yeah.
But I see it as it's going to be on the city. And you're right, it's like blood out of a turnip. You're not going to get anything out of a business that's already closed. So I don't know. It creates quite an issue.
If it was me, I'd scrap it.
I would too.
I'd keep the damaged sign in there personally. I'd cut it down from 90 to 60 days, but that's just because I think a sign that's damaged should probably be, if I was the guy owning the business, I'd probably want it repaired sooner too, but I'm not strongly suggesting anything like that.
Okay.
Can the city put a lien against whoever the property owner is?
You can, but that's
Probably
another
could.
enforcement.
If we want to go to that degree to try to do something, I think we probably could. That degree of enforcement, there's no history of it here in Canby,
I
period.
think there's unpaid utility bills and things like that. But
That's what they've started after in the past year. In fact, the city went 20 years without enforcing not paying your utility bill. And so that has really improved in the past couple of years. And so they're making people be responsible now for their utility bill non-payments. So we'd be reaching out with some of these smaller issues.
Okay, so I guess we tell the council about this discussion.
Yeah,
And
I think,
Well, I had planned that by the end of today to make a recommendation.
Okay.
Whether those would, I mean, whatever the body decides to make a recommendation with respect to these, and we could parcel some out if we didn't want to pass a certain one, recommend a certain one.
Okay.
yep.
They
It's
can
an-
override us if they want something different, I guess.
It's an enforcement issue. You can make all the laws in the world, but if you can't enforce them, they're not worth anything.
Agreed.
Sometimes just asking someone nicely to take your easy to take down sign.
It's amazing how far you get with the
Okay.
carrots.
Page 21. Last meeting, we discussed, as the code currently reads, it says a temporary sign shouldn't be more than 4 square feet in a commercial industrial area, which we assumed is a mistake because we don't have this in there, but it allows for a larger sign in a residential area. But it's usually a larger sign is allowed in commercial, industrial, smaller residential. So it's kind of we threw out 15 and then we discussed, well, maybe it should be a little bit larger. So for a temporary sign in commercial and industrial should be not exceed 32 square feet was the discussion.
like just over 5 by 6.
Yeah. Page 22, this is kind of a language cleanup, and we're also adding in a monument sign for automobile service station signs. This is just kind of a ancillary sign standards that's kind of been added in the sign chapter about automobile service station signs, and I described, we're going to allow a pole sign. It needs to allow a monument sign too. As it reads now, it kind of implies that a monument sign wouldn't be allowed, which is, a monument sign's preferred over a pole sign, so that's why that's in there. And hopefully the way it read before was completely confusing. Is that,
Yeah, this looks better.
does that help? Okay. Okay, on to the lighting chapter. It was suggested that we need to reflect changes in technology. And we have a lot of standards in here talking about wattage. And just so you know, what I put in there is completely wrong. The calculations are not right. So you see a supplemental little handout sheet that I put in front of you. This is from the Department of Energy. These two little sheets kind of showing equivalencies now, but now when you're buying a bulb, you're looking for lumens, not wattage. Lumens accurately describes how much light is put out, not wattage anymore, because of a very low watt energy efficient bulb can put out a lot of light. So I had done some proportional calculations the wrong way. That's why I'm a planner and not a
Physicist?
mathematician or physicist. I put them way too high. So using this chart from the Department of
22,000 lumens, that's
yeah,
the price.
yeah, I did it. It's completely not right. So wherever it says 300 watts in the code, we need to change it to 5200. Where it says 30 watts, it needs to reflect the proportions of this chart.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so if we go on to page,
On page 25, you missed one of the wattages.
I
Not to be
did.
the picky person, but it's in the yellow on paragraph A.
Oh, okay. If lumens are within, okay. But so, for example, a 30 watt bulb, would, according to this chart from the Department of Energy, would be equivalent to a 520 lumens, not that number that I got before, which so on page 25, it would be 520 is equals to, we would replace that with 520 lumens. A 300 watt is equivalent to a 5200 lumen. Next page, on page 26, a 150 watt bulb is a 2600. 60 watt bulb would be 800. A 450 would be 7800. A 100 would be 1600 lumens. And 60 would be 800. So yeah, I was a little high.
Okay, so you'll make all those
Yeah, I'll make
corrections
them
later.
right.
Okay.
So that's all the changes are made in that, just changing wattage to lumens.
Okay.
Page 28, this is new too. I think we discussed it orally, but talking about access driveways, how far they should be from an intersection. And there's another section in the code, another chapter in the code that talks about single-family residential driveways to be 30 feet, but this table says 50 feet. So that's, another instance to where the code was conflicting, but that just specifies that that's for, 50 feet would be like for a business. Okay, we'll skip the next few pages since they don't have any pink. Page 42.
Can you stop on 33, please? 33, number 7. I read that a couple times. It doesn't read correctly.
So it's saying,
It sounded to me like it's saying the same thing twice.
Twice.
It's kind
It
of
is.
contradicting
Well,
itself.
the reason it's confusing is the first, before the yellow starts, you see this word site and design review.
Mhm.
That is a different process than at the end of the yellow sentence,
So
which
both
is
of them say in
site
excess
plan.
of 2,500.
Yeah, but that's because if you're in excess of 2,500, you do have to do a site plan review, which is a building permit application.
one of them
But-
you go to the planning
Oh,
department
I
and get a
gotcha.
building permit. The other you go to the planning commission.
It's the details of the wording. Gotcha.
It's site and design review versus site plan review.
Okay.
So we
That was
could,
my question.
we
Yeah.
could insert the word, to clarify, it, exempted from the planning commission site and design review, or, because all site and design review does go to the planning commission. I don't know if we need to do that, but that's,
We could say type 3, type
yeah. that
type
might be-
3,
I would probably,
and then require a type 1 site plan review.
That'd help make that distinction, yeah. Good catch, very confusing.
So if you go to page 42. I actually saw a bookshelf in our office with the Sunset Garden book on
You
it.
did not.
So that's where that came from.
We had a big, long art discussion on whether or not the Sunset Western Garden book was really the definitive publication for landscaping methods.
I actually had a note on this. What is this book?
Well, according to the Oregon State Extension Service, I mean, no, seriously, that is there, what they use as the Bible for that sort of thing.
Wow.
You guys keep this up, people are going to start watching on TV.
Yeah.
Like Jeopardy.
Yeah, those in the know.
But that's why we asked them to put four
Yeah.
similar publications, because that way if the Sunset Western Garden book goes under
Yeah.
and replaced by the Sunrise.
Sunset Eastern. Garden.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was going to say, what would a similar publication be?
I think something
Sunrise
from
Eastern,
like
I guess.
OSU Extension, or that's what I would use.
I would hate to admit that I have several copies. But I do.
You would have been helpful the last meeting. You could have explained it all for us.
Okay, page 45, it's just repeating that for immovable surface property owner language. So page 46 through 48, I had Darvin Trammell, our environmental services coordinator, he's involved with a lot of the stormwater management, stormwater enforcement, look over this. And these were some of his changes suggested. I think, and we're changing the required language to encourage. and I think that's giving a little more leeway, but at this type, if a public street or this is talking about permeable surfaces in this is chapter 1664 subdivisions. So a subdivision is going to go to the planning commission anyways, so the planning commission could always place a condition of approval that
You must do it.
Right. So
So- I think this was he was kind of, I think, a little, hadn't seen some of this before, so, you know, I guess there might be instances where a permeable surface wouldn't be, because of soil conditions and,
The latter part of the sentence, to me, actually gives you the out not to do it, if feasible.
yeah.
Or-
So I guess, yeah, even now, it's kind of,
Because that was like, not like marshlands, but other alternatives they would have
Yeah.
to do that kind of thing.
I mean, there's a lot of low-impact development alternatives that you can use besides permeable. That's just an option. So you could do rain gardens or...
The intent of all these low-impact changes that we made just 2 years ago in the code that are in here now are, really is this word. I mean, we're trying to move, it's a massive movement to handle stormwater runoff in a more appropriate way. And so the city is currently just contracted for our master stormwater plan. We're going to be spending upwards of $100,000 to develop the stormwater master plan, and of course it's being driven by DEQ water quality standards, a lot of it, to protect salmon, protect the fish, and all of this kind of stuff. And so we have to address all of those requirements. There's tons of regulatory requirements that have to do with stormwater runoff, yet we're currently not collecting any fee to handle that kind of thing, and we need to correct existing situations that are around town. And so it's going to be an enormous and costly thing for every community in the future to meet the requirements. And so when you think, I'm mentioning this because it's almost to the point where we want to start requiring so that we can save the taxpayers enormous amount of fines in the future if we don't meet the DEQ standards, because we have to start moving towards correcting existing bad practices and such in order to meet the standards. And so we are trying to get people to do these alternatives, but you need to think of it as a box, a toolbox. You have all of these different solutions, and you usually have a professional registered engineer that is attuned with all of those practices that can pinpoint which situation one would work best in over another. And so it really does take that professional expertise to do that. So I think that's why Darvin suggested the word encourage, because, hey, let the professional make that judgment on which is going to work best in any given situation. And in some, the low-impact design solution might not be feasible.
It would strike me, in reading this, it would strike me, I don't have a problem with this change, I actually like it, but it would strike me that, Brian, as you had mentioned, changing from required to encouraged makes if a feasible alternative totally moot, because there's no requirement now.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm reading it now. So, yeah, I'm not sure that
And if we ever interpret that, I just want to throw it out there, I mean, that's kind of what it says, is there's no requirement on the LED alternatives right now. If we do that change.
So I thought it had enough leeway in the way it was worded, that, if they can make a case for not doing the low-impact alternative, then okay. We'll let the professional agree that it's too costly or it's really not feasible in this situation, but most of the time, your first thought should be, what low-impact solution can I implement? And
Yeah, I don't like the
I don't
change.
know.
Only because if it's feasible, then it should be required. If it's
Yeah.
not, then it's encouraged, which makes it even more wishy-washy.
Yeah, it's definitely not a requirement. It says encouraged.
I mean,
Well, it's encouraged where feasible.
oftentimes
Thanks for encouraging me, but I'm not going to do it anyway.
it's difficult to really judge cost factors because your low-impact design oftentimes might cost a little more, or some instances it might be a lot cheaper, but then over a period of time, it might cost more because the maintenance involved with low-impact solutions are higher.
But they could just put in a variant. If they felt like it was cost prohibitive to their project, they would say, well, we want to do a variance, and they would bring it
Yeah.
to the planning commission, and we could approve that, right?
Yeah, and as we said, we started off here, is that almost all these instances, it's going to be something that's in front of the planning commission for review and approval, and so you're going to be potentially aware of what kind of runoff solution they're proposing. It may not be fully engineered yet, because oftentimes it isn't at the planning commission level, but their solution needs to be conceptually shared at our level. And then they fully develop the engineered solution with calculations and stuff later. So you don't always see the fully designed solution, but you see their concept.
Okay. What about on page 47? That was number 4.
So you got the end. Yeah.
We're just talking if anybody disagreed or not.
Okay, let's move forward, I guess. We're done with discussion on that one.
Page 47, number 4. That's just a little language cleanup. Basically, a lot of the times, we specify DEQ requires that you manage stormwater on site.